Hey guys, welcome back to the channel. So I wanted to make a quick video on summer fishing. This is a tough time of year, but once you get the hang of it, it can be really good. It can be really good. So I just want to make a quick video about what I do to catch more fish in the heat of the summer. So I'm going to start off with where I find fish. And obviously this is key any time of the year. If you have the ability to find the fish, you will inevitably catch more fish. I mean, it's as simple as that. I don't do anything too special, but I thought I might as well describe what I do, and maybe you can take something from it. So generally speaking, I have a lot of experience fishing the heat of the day because I don't have a flexible schedule. I have to fish just when I get a chance, and ultimately that happens after I get off work, which is early to mid-afternoon. So that's the heat of the day, and that has forced me to adapt. I now generally know how to catch them during the tougher part of the day, which is good, because if you can catch them during the heat of the day, you can generally catch them anytime. What I've found is by the time I get out, a lot of the fish push a little offshore, and that could, some lakes mean only 50 feet. Some lakes, it could mean hundreds of feet. But the point is I end up doing a lot of offshore fishing, even for largemouth in some lakes. I know I've noticed a lot of lakes don't fish as well offshore with largemouth, but there are some lakes that do, and that could apply to those lakes as well. If you're in a smaller lake that's shallow, we're only talking about getting out to the edge of the lily pads or some weed lines not too far from shore. So that's offshore in that case. When it comes to smallmouth, that's a whole different story. They push out pretty deep. They could be 15, 20, 30, sometimes 40 feet. I'm sure beyond, but I don't like to fish terribly deep unless I have to. But that's what I found. So just a nugget of information would be to, if you get out early and very early, at dawn or thereafter, I would definitely focus on shallower water with moving baits until these fish start to slide out a little bit. Then they get a little finicky, and then you could pick apart weed lines, offshore structure and cover, and and then work those fish that way. As far as specifically finding fish and developing a pattern, that's a whole nother story. I can make a 45-minute video on just that, because that is a big challenge and something I've gotten very good at over the last couple years. I generally find where these fish are setting up and then try to recreate that in other areas of that specific lake. So for example, if you start getting bites in about 15 foot of water or on a deeper weed line, or something specific like stumps or pilings, then you could go ahead and try to recreate that during the day. I pay very close attention to when I get bit, what I'm throwing, when, water temperature. When you pay attention to all these things, you can put together patterns a little quicker. And all this is natural for me because I spend a lot of time on the water, so it's just I'm on autopilot. I can quickly put together a pattern and just keep it going throughout the day. So for some of you who don't fish quite as much, it may take an extra effort just to pay attention to the little things. Even little bites. I don't personally pay a lot of attention to smaller bites, and I think that's a mistake that a lot of guys do. if the bite is tough and you end up getting a 10-inch bass, I don't actually equate that into a pattern for myself, because a lot of times these smaller fish are not having the same behavior as these bigger fish, which is what I target. So I dismiss that. If you're fine with a smaller bite, certainly incorporate that into your thinking and pay attention to those bites as well. But I actually dismiss smaller bites basically altogether. I need to get a good bite, a good fish in the boat, or see some nice fish on my electronics before I can start equating what the pattern is. So yeah, so for example, you can find some wood in 15 foot of water, or some boulders in 20 foot of water. If you start getting bites there, you just remember that, and then you can go through and specifically look for that type of cover in that depth range and start to put things together. Now, what's nice is generally speaking, if you're on an average day with average weather and you put together a little something, you can build on that over days and weeks, and actually apply it to future years with those same conditions. So something to pay attention to when you're trying to figure out these fish on any given lake. Now, every lake is different. I have found that to be a fact. Now, I would say some patterns work on multiple lakes if it's a no-brainer pattern like deeper weed lines, things like that. But a lot of times these patterns apply to specific lakes, specific times a year. So you have to keep that in mind as well. What works on one lake may not work on another, and it's unfortunate, but that's what makes this so interesting. You got to work at figuring out these fish. So yeah, as far as finding the cover, so I started with no electronics on a John boat, and I had to go off of just when I got bites and when I boated fish. That's how you start making a pattern, and it oftentimes takes 2-3 bites or fish to start to really put together a pattern. Now, if you have electronics and you're figuring out how to use those, and you can, my electronics aren't even nice enough to see fish on side imaging. So a lot of times I find just cover. You may not see any fish, but that does not mean they're not there. And that goes goes for forward-facing sonar as well. You may not see the fish, but if you're getting bites or you find the cover, in summer especially, they stay very tight to cover. And you just got to cast at the cover. Cast at the cover, regardless if you think there's fish there or not, especially once you start developing a pattern. So I find that there's generally 3 types of fish when I'm scouting these lakes and areas. I only actually target 2 of the 3, and I'm generalizing here, but just to give you an idea of how I look at finding these fish. So I'd say the first category of fish is roamers. You got fish that are sort of either suspended or roaming, and those fish, especially in the heat of the day, are very difficult to catch. So I actually don't target those fish. You know, if the bite's good, you can certainly target any fish, and they're catchable. But in most cases, when the bite is tough, you want to ignore those fish, and that's hard to do. But it's something I had to work at. You just ignore them, move on, and you find fish that are in a different category, which is the second category of fish are fish that are very tight to cover. Even if they're in singles or 1 or 2 fish, if they're right on cover, they're going to be way easier to catch. That's why I think dock fishing is so productive. Pilings, weeds, things like that. When these fish are surrounded in cover, they feel more secure and they're more willing to bite. So on days when you can't you just can't get a bite. You got to fish that much closer to cover, because those are gonna be the fish that you get to bite. And throughout this video, when I'm talking about this, I'm actually focusing on big fish. So really tight to cover, which is like right on stumps, laydowns, docks. You want to learn how to skip, get all the way under those docks. Real tight to pilings when you're pitching or casting. You want to get as close to those pilings as possible without potentially losing your gear. So so that's the second category of fish. The third is not as easy to find, especially if you don't have electronics, but schooling fish. Now those fish are a little easier to catch also, even if they're not attached to cover. Ideally, you'd want to get schooling fish that are close to cover. Those will be the easiest fish to catch, and especially if they're big, you have a real shot at getting them to bite when they're schooled and close to cover. But schooling fish in general are just easier to catch. They have this competitive mindset and they react a little more. They spend less time studying your bait. They're more worried about the other fish getting to the bait before them. So they let their guard down just a little bit, and that's enough to trick a big fish into biting. So schooling fish is the last category that is worthy of focusing on. If you have the ability to use your electronics or sight fish or what have you, if you find these schooling fish, definitely target those. So that covers what type of fish to target. So I'm just gonna briefly go over my favorite baits. And this time of year, I know everyone's different, but I have a unique mindset in that I like to either focus on bigger baits or very small finesse baits. I don't fish much in between unless I'm focusing on these fish that are very tight or in cover. Then I'll throw like a jig or crank them or a Texas rig craw or a creature bait of some sort. That's basically the only time I throw mid-size baits in general. But as far as big baits, when these fish are lethargic, lazy, and hard to catch in the summer, one thing I do that often will get me an extra bite or two is throw oversized baits in general. Now, for the longest time, I didn't throw big baits. I just wasn't comfortable with them. But now I have a good rod that I can throw bigger baits. There's a Huddleston big swim baits, mag draft. Those types of baits are fantastic. Also wake baits. These bigger baits have drawing power. And these fish, even if you're not casting right on them, if you have water clarity that is, decent, these fish will swim a long ways to hit a glide bait. They'll hit a glide bait. It's a long ways to hit a bigger bait, and especially the big ones. So if you're one of those guys that just want to get bigger bites, don't be afraid to throw big baits, even on slow days. I find some of my best days as far as bigger fish have been on slow days, but I'm throwing big baits that can draw them out. And it's the same type of deal. You throw it near schools or pretty tight to cover, and these fish will leave their cover, expose themselves to come either look at or hit a big bait. So that is the ticket. So I got some other examples here. Big glide bait, 6-inch mag draft. These are money. Anything in that realm or that size will do the trick. So I think that's it. I know I'm generalizing a lot, but I'm just trying to do an overview of summer fishing because I haven't had time to really do in-depth videos on specific techniques or anything like that this year. I've been very, very busy with work. But yeah, in general, bigger baits, even during the heat of the day, on the heat of the summer. Okay, let's go to the other end of the spectrum. Finesse Techniques. Now this is my go-to this time of year for sure. Just a simple jig head with either a minnow or a Kitech, a little Kitech on the back. Very effective if you throw it around this type of cover or schooling fish. You know, small 2.8 Kitechs. I honestly, this is probably the #1 bait, especially, you know, when it's tough. Throwing that around cover is money. Even these small little baits is very effective, and you just have to play around with your weights, your depth, whether you're mid strolling or a little lower in the column. Very, very effective and absolutely worth trying. If you're not much of a, you know, open water fisherman or offshore fisherman, it would be worth trying to learn with this technique, because it's actually very easy. They'll hit it on the drop, slowly reeling it back, sometimes burning it. It's just a very effective way to get these fish to bite. Now, when I do the minnow style baits like this, I'll even do something really small. This is like a 4-inch. I'll do like a 3-inch for smallmouth, 4-inch for largemouth. In general, when it comes to minnows, Kitechs, or drop shot, which I'll get into, I've noticed largemouth don't fall for the little baits as well as smallmouth. And in general, my thinking is if I'm targeting largemouth, I'm going an inch bigger than if I'm targeting smallmouth. And that's across the board, whether that's drop shot, minnow style baits, or Kitechs. That's just, I have found that to be pretty much a pattern across almost all lakes that I fish. So keep that in mind when you're selecting the size, depending on what type of fish you're targeting. At the moment, I have a bigger, I think this is a 5-inch minnow, but I was just in a largemouth tournament, so I was using that. But typically for a smallmouth, I do 3 to 4-inch. So that covers the jig head. I have that literally tied on every single time I go out. A handful of these I swap out to try different things, but that is a staple for me. Same with a drop shot. Drop shot is money, and this year I'm actually throwing it a little bit more at largemouth as well. And I started making that work pretty well late summer last year, and I kind of stuck with it this year, and I'm glad I did, because these bigger largemouth are a little trickier to get to bite. And my mistake last year was throwing baits, the same baits that I was throwing at smallmouth, and they just wouldn't go for it. They wouldn't look at it, they wouldn't follow it. But as soon as I upsized my baits in general, it was just enough to get them interested. So that is key. So when it comes to worms, you know, I'd throw a 4-inch for smallmouth and then a 6-inch for largemouth. When it comes to other like flat tail baits or straight tail, or like anything ribbed and small would work too. There's quite a few different baits on the market, and I think specific baits and colors aren't as important as profile. That's just my belief. But if you get the right size, I'd focus on size more than color. But as soon as you got the right size in front of these fish and you start getting bit, just know that's a huge factor. Then you can start dialing in the color. I think color is secondary. Let's talk about briefly mid-size baits. I touched on it already, but this is just Texas rig craw. You could do, weightless Senko is one of my favorites for dock fishing or any shallow cover, especially if it's extremely weedy. And then of course top water. At the moment, I have a walking bait tied on and a big wake bait. This is just something fun I'm using this year. I got it for my birthday, but I've noticed it's getting some bigger bites. But typically I'd be throwing like a whopper plopper, frog, or something like that on my heavier setup for top water. But top water is obviously a good approach, especially in the morning when these fish are a little bit more towards shore. And then when they're offshore, I find that a walking bait is great, especially for offshore smallmouth. When they're willing to look up, it's a good way to go. Any walking bait in general, again, profile, sound is more important than color. So if you're playing with different baits, just get different sizes to start, and then once you start getting that dialed in, then you can play with colors. All right, and that wraps up baits for the most part. And if you guys want me to dial into any specific baits, just leave a comment, and you know, maybe if I get time, I'll get a little bit in depth on specific baits. I think one category worthy of extra attention would be the drop shot. It's undeniable how effective that is during these hotter months. I lean on it more and more every year, and it's unfortunate. I know it's not the exciting way to fish, but just as far as flat out getting bites, can't beat the drop shot. All right, and I think that covers everything. I just got out of a tournament this last weekend, and I did pretty well. Got 4th place, puts me in, I was told, 2nd place for Angler of the Year. Although I haven't won any tournaments since my Lake Washington tournament, I've been consistently doing well in these tournaments, which has kept me in the running for Angler of the Year. So my last 2 tournaments coming up are going to be, obviously it's going to decide the whole season. So it's going to be smallmouth fishing predominantly, and it's something I'm pretty good at, and so it should make it pretty interesting. It's basically a 3-horse race right now, and yeah, I'd be really excited if I pulled it off again this year. That'd be 2 years in a row Angler of the Year, which obviously is a big accomplishment considering I've only started doing tournaments last year. So stay tuned for that. I might do a video. I might combine a couple different tournaments into one quicker video, because I know it's not what everyone's interested in. But if anyone likes following the tournament stuff, I'll put together a nice little video. Maybe I'll compile the last 3 tournaments into one video, and it should be exciting. Hopefully it has a happy ending for me. But yeah, time will tell. So thanks for tuning in again for another video, and I hope that some of you guys take away some good stuff. I got very good feedback on the last couple videos as far as tips, and I know some of you have been whacking them doing exactly what I'm describing. So for those of you following closely and are trying to implement some of these tips and tricks that I have, this should be a good one. I know it's generalizing a lot, but this is all very good information, and will go a long way towards getting you guys some extra bites. So thanks for tuning in, and I'll check with you guys on the next one. Peace.